the informed investor. Thanks to Century 21 agents, defying mediocrity and delivering extraordinary experiences.
10 minutes to 10 it is here on nights. Of course, we're 3 weeks away now from spring, so we've battled our way through winter. Weather hasn't been too bad, but of course, when spring springs, we start to think particularly about the real estate market starting to really take off. There's a good question, though. Is it a good time to sell or a good time to buy? Let's find out. Warren McCarthy is the CEO of Century 21. Hello, Warren. How are you?
Yes, good evening, John. Good to be with you once again. And,
well, does it follow that if it's good to be a buyer or a seller, it can't be that good the other way, or what? How does that work?
Well, spring's a funny period. You know, we find that it's the end of the football season. People are a lot more busier because they're outdoors, the weather's warming up, and there's still this infatuation with property. People want to get out there and look at property, and I suppose from a seller's point of view, there are a lot more properties coming onto the market in that period of time because people traditionally think that's the best period of the year to put their property on the market. And, of course, buyers have a lot more choice. But let me say that 11 weeks after the election, John, we've still got clearance rates in our auction environment well and truly over 70% in Sydney and Melbourne, which cater for 80% of all auctions. And so the marketplace is still buzzing along because of this demand versus supply, where there's a good build-up of demand happening, but not enough supply to cater for that demand. And so you're getting some really good, strong clearance rates. And I think that's going to continue right into the spring. And bear in mind, too, that we have this sort of lag in the market from when a deal is done or a property is auctioned and sold on that day. There's about a 2-month delay before the property actually settles and actually the figures then come through from the various authorities. So it's a marketplace that's been going fairly well right since the election time.
Okay, here's a question for you. If you're an agent and someone wants to sell, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I want to sell, I don't want to spend too much more money. Do you sometimes have to push people to do a lot of that, that cosmetic work that's going to make the place look better, but they're thinking, well, why would I do it? Because it's not really, not really my place anymore. I'm trying to sell it.
Well, it's
and does it add value?
The property's got to stand out from the crowd, as they say, and you can style and stage the property to make it do just that. And of course, you can campaign the property as such that it's across all media. But then you've got to look at that point of difference. And at Century 21, we've got the opportunity to promote property through our Home Beautiful magazine affiliation, and I think that's a great opportunity for people to look at as we go forward. So there's a bit of a plug for us.
All right, Home Beautiful magazine. Okay, now, apartment buildings, we've had, everyone knows, unless you've been living under a rock, we've had a lot of problems right through the country, but CoreLogic's saying apartment prices are holding strong in both Sydney and Melbourne and might be leading a market recovery. Does that mean people are looking for bargains?
Yeah, it's not surprising to hear this. The way people are in this time-poor society, we're looking for convenience, we're looking for affordability, we want to be closer to the amenities and facilities, and I think that's starting to show through with the amount of development that's been happening around the cities of Australia. You're finding a lot of demand starting to soak up the supply, albeit there's a lot of supply yet to come. And that will see whether that starts to steady out, that particular trend of apartments outstripping houses in terms of demand.
Interesting. And look, we know about the pressure people are putting on after the Royal Commission, banks being very careful about lending and asking all sorts of questions. How many coffees do you have? Are they asking, even, I guess it costs a bit to own a pet, are they asking questions about whether you own a pet or a dog, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's unusual, isn't it? I mean, I think the banks were a little bit spooked after the Royal Commission. They got very, very loose before the boom in terms of lending criteria, and then as soon as the Commission happened, they tightened up considerably. And look, that's part of being responsible. I get that. And since the last few months have come across, there's been, a relaxation of the APRA guidelines, and now they're shooting for a 2.5% above the interest rate as a sort of like a buffer for the borrower to consider as part of their go forward and their affordability factor of repaying the loan. I think that's sensible, and I think not only the banks have responsibility in that shape, but so do the borrowers. And look, if they've got spend in their life that's across pets or other expenditure each month, then they've got to consider whether they curtail any of those expenses in order to take on a loan or a debt the size of a mortgage.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess, if you're asking people, you have a coffee a day, can you afford that? They're asking about their Netflix subscriptions. So I suppose if it's a dog, for instance, you've got to have the food for the dog, potential vet bills, all that sort of stuff, and you've got to amortise that through for what your potential outgoings might be.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right,
that's commonsensical, but very responsible if you're going to be looking at having a long-term borrowing in an investment or a home that you live in, which is generally dealt with as a long-term play.
All right. Okay. Look, it's very interesting with spring coming up, but it looks like the market is going through a recovery. So that is good news for the overall economy. We'll talk next week. Thank you very much, Warren.
Thanks again, John. Good
Warren McCarthy, CEO of Century 21. There's some interesting information there in relation to particularly, spring, with the spring sales coming up, and also what's happening with apartments, because as we know, a lot of those apartments look really good. I grew up in an old Art Deco apartment and didn't have a balcony. These days there's outdoor areas, there's facilities. The question is how well they're built. But I think that's being factored in now by a lot of people who are out there bargain hunting, and in both Sydney and Melbourne, the apartment market looks like it's on the move.